Hi, Emily here with nonprofitist.org. We have Dalaina on the phone. She is the founder and CEO of Dark Bali, which is an organization out of Bali that tell us what your mission is. Tell us what you do.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, we are all about the human trafficking cause. So our vision is to see sex slavery abolished and broken lives restored. So we do it kind of in a really unique way. Rather than jumping in on the front lines doing prevention or restoration work, we're actually working with a whole bunch of different organizations across the country that are doing the front lines work and trying to equip them to be able to do their work better, to network them together, to bring data and research so that they can have the numbers that they need to go get funds and things like that. So we are behind the scenes caring for caregivers and providing structure and networking, and resources for that community.
How big of a problem is human sex trafficking in Bali, in Indonesia?
So the data is hard to come by. The numbers we have are a decade old, and I was chasing them down a couple years ago and finally found the guy that did the research and called his office, and his secretary said, sorry, he just died. So nobody else is studying this, but our decade old number is that around 80,000 children are trafficked in Indonesia every year. The government recently put out a number that supported that, maybe makes it look a little bit higher. We don't really know, but we know it's in the tens of thousands, maybe up to 100,000 children in Indonesia. Obviously, there are adults that are trafficked as well. So we're focused more on the sex trafficking part of it, but we're definitely supporting organizations that are involved in anti-labor trafficking as well.
Okay. And so how many arrests or rescues, just to kind of give a number of what's happening there?
Yeah, I think most recently our 2020 report, I think Indonesia prosecuted like around 140 cases out of that 80,000 number. So there's a pretty big disparity between kind of the people that are being recovered and the people that are still being enslaved. So it can be a little frustrating at times, feeling like we're climbing a big mountain.
Wow, yeah. And so why do you think that discrepancy exists? What's missing?
I think there's lots of reasons. I think, there's corruption, I think, in every law enforcement organization in any country. And there's certainly some in Indonesia. But I think what I've seen is just an under-resourcing of the anti-trafficking task forces. A lot of times they don't even have much of a budget at all. The task force for a big city or even Bali is like one person. So you have one person with virtually no budget trying to do investigations, and it's really difficult. And a lot of times some of our partners have been asked to fund investigations because the police didn't have money to do it. Dark Bali has brought in investigators to help with the police on the police request because they just didn't have the manpower to work a case. So I think a lot of times it's not for the lack of desire or the lack of compassion for the issue. It's because there's not resources. And then another interesting bit about Indonesian, in the law enforcement talking about recovery is they, in an effort to curb corruption, they actually transition their cops to a new department every couple of years. So you can have, detectives that are working trafficking cases, but within a couple of years, they get replaced by a new set. And so you're kind of constantly having to retrain, and it's hard to get somebody that's got like decades of experience in the issue because they're just kind of cycling constantly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how does the public perceive the issue? Is it kind of commonly known, or?
No, it's not. If you've been to Thailand or other places in Southeast Asia, prostitution is kind of in your face. You walk down the street and, you see women, and sometimes you even see minors. They're just there. Indonesia, it's a very shame thing. It's shameful to be involved in prostitution. It's illegal. And so it's very hidden. You can live next to a brothel and you might not even realize it because they just look like homes. And so the average Indonesian, unless you're involved as a buyer or as a pimp or as a victim, you don't really know what's going on. I remember one time I was at the market and there was a man, and we just got to talking, and he was asking, why do you live in Bali? Because you're American. And told him a little bit about Dark Bali and what we did. And he just was really curious. And he was asking questions like, you mean there's brothels here, like with slaves? And I was like, yeah. And he asked where. And so I gave him kind of a general area of one of the red light districts. And he goes, wait, those places, like the women don't want to be there? And I said, not all of them. I mean, some of them are sex workers by choice, but some of them are trafficking victims. Some of them are minors. And he actually started crying. He like had tears come to his eyes. And it was, I don't know for sure because he didn't say, but I suspected he had been there before as somebody that was purchasing sex. And it just never even occurred to him that maybe they didn't want to be doing that. So there's a big need for educating the Indonesian population as a whole. I think younger people, students, they've had a little bit more access to the internet, yay globalization. And I think they're a lot more willing to engage with the topic and maybe a little bit more savvy about it. I feel like the older generation often just doesn't want to know. It's very embarrassing.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And I think, I'm not sure why it's, maybe it's just too hard to engage with it, or you feel helpless and you'd rather just not know what's happening or think about the fact that it's happening, but that definitely doesn't help.
Yeah, well, and Indonesia is a shame-based culture. And so having your honor is really important. And so one of our strategies, if you will, is not to shame the Indonesian government or to shame, a particular community or the police force or whatever, but to say, look, like this is an issue, but here's all the ways that you can, do something about it. Here's all these resources so that when they're ready to engage, because they can't just say there's a problem. They have to be able to say there's a problem, but look what we're doing. And so we're really trying to push here's what you can do so that they can grab that, here's what we're doing, and then be honest. And we've seen that. We've seen in 2014, the governor of Bali literally said, I think it was even on TV, like, we don't have any trafficking here.
Oh, wow.
And everyone I work with is like, really? Because I was just over there. Okay. But now we have leaders that are like, yes, we do have these issues, but here are the things we're doing. And we're seeing a lot of stuff. A couple of years ago, our airport just was like, you know what, if you have like pedophile, if Interpol has sent us that saying that you're pedophile, you just can't come. Like you can't come into Bali. And so they're actually checking that and they're turning people away. And so, that's particularly in Bali. And, we'd love to see that in all the airports across Indonesia. But we're seeing things turn, I think, because when people have the resources to say that they're doing something in an honor shame society, they're more willing to acknowledge the problem. So it's kind of a bit of a chess game sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can people get involved in what you're doing?
Goodness, there's a lot of ways. We have, obviously, if you live in Indonesia, it's fantastic. There's a lot of different organizations we like to connect people with. So having a strong volunteer base across any NGO is great. People have skills. We are always looking for people that are working in law enforcement, or if they're working in any kind of like social work or therapy or whatever. We have a ongoing need for training in trauma-informed care or in different kind of therapeutic modalities, because there's just not a lot of resources available in Indonesian for Indonesian counselors and caregivers. So we're always looking for people to train in that. One of my bestest, greatest volunteers is an accountant, and she does my books, which frees me up. So, there's like anything, web development, like there's all this sorts of thing. I did put out a blog a few weeks ago about, I think it was like 10 ways you can help that doesn't cost money.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of really great ways that people can get involved. Obviously, every organization needs its donors that gets excited about them, tells all their friends and all that stuff. So we always love, when people want to jump in as advocates and our impact team. But I think there's just so many different ways that if you care about a cause that you can get involved in bringing your own skills. I have a businesswoman that I'm linking up with right now, and she's a jewelry designer, and she's like, I want to make a piece that's just for Dark Bali and, and can raise funds and awareness. I'm like, awesome. Cause that's her passion, like that makes sense to her. So yeah, I think there's lots of ways to get creative and get involved with people.
I love that. I'm so glad that you shared it in that way, because I think a lot of times people are just like, they just think that the only way that they can help is to give money, but you're so right. Just like all of those things that support what the organization does make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Is there anything else you want to share with us?
I think I've just been really encouraged a lot in the last, I guess, I don't know, 3-4 months or so. I feel like anti-trafficking has become a kind of a more hot topic than usual in the US.
Yeah.
And on one hand, I think that that is amazing. I think there are a lot of people that are like, wait, what? What's happening? I want to get involved in this. And that's really, really important. I also think that I would leave people with kind of the caution to make sure that they do their homework before they share information, before they kind of, yeah, offer their opinions if they don't necessarily know if it's a new topic. There's been a lot of misinformation out there that's actually harmed anti-trafficking work quite a bit. So I would say if you care about the issue, find an organization that's doing stuff that you love and get to know them and learn a lot about the topic. So that when you do share and you do advocate, you can do it from a place of knowledge and insight and with the backing of credible organizations. So I think that's kind of one that I feel like a lot of people in the sector have been talking about. Like, how do we encourage people, but also encourage people to do it safely and to do it correctly and to not put misinformation out there that actually takes away from the real stories that we want to tell.
Absolutely. Is there anything that you want to kind of deconstruct now that you have a platform?
Oh, good Lord. I don't think we have enough time. It's interesting because I've done a lot of work in the US as well, working directly with survivors and stuff. And I think one of the things that makes me a little crazy is I hear these stories about, oh my God, they're going to snatch my kid from Target. I'm like, no, they're not. That's not how that works. That the populations that are trafficked are people that are vulnerable. They're people that are often in poverty. They're people that in the States, runaways, people with drug addictions, people from broken homes. I know in California where I worked for the 2 years that I was working in that region, 100% of the kids that came through as trafficking survivors were coming out of the system, either as juvenile delinquents or as foster kids, 100%. There were no random little kids from the suburbs getting snatched in Target. It just doesn't happen. It's so rare. And I think,
do you mean CPS?
Yeah, they were with CPS either as foster kids or just as juveniles in detention. So, I think as a parent myself, I get the fear and you want to protect the kids.
Yeah.
But when the story becomes about, it's like Taken with Liam Neeson, it's the white girl snatched from the suburbs.
Yeah.
The reality is that's 7%. It's a very, very small number. And traffickers are smart. They're not going to go after kids who have parents that are going to go look for them. Traffickers are going to go after the runaways. They're going to go after kids in foster care. They're going to go after vulnerable people. So LGBT kids that have gotten kicked out of home are extremely vulnerable. So I think as I've talked to survivors, one of the things that I've heard is it's so frustrating because I can't compete with that story. My story is not a Liam Neeson story, but no one wants to hear my story anymore. And so I think that that's really the tragedy is we want this sexy kidnapping story of this girl that we can identify with rather than the real stories that are actually happening. And so we've basically taken away the voice of the survivor again, because we don't want to hear what they have to say. We don't want to hear about the drugs and the broken homes and, the trauma that becomes trafficking later. We don't want to hear about how they got involved with a boyfriend and got involved in prostitution and got hooked on drugs. And then eventually they got trafficked because that's more common, but it's not sexy. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. It makes total sense.
So yeah, I think, it's hard to step back from that because that story sells.
Yeah.
But I think we do a real disservice to survivors and to organizations that are, working on these issues. You're doing prevention in, marginalized communities or prevention in communities with a lot of poverty or these kind of contributing issues. And nobody really cares about that anymore. So for us in Indonesia, it's not the same as in the States. In the States, it's often related to the things I just said. In Indonesia, it's poverty. People are looking for a job and they get trafficked. It's also related to child marriage. So the most common story we get is 13-year-old girl gets married, a year later has a baby, her husband takes off, and she has no education. She has a kid to care for and a cultural obligation to take care of her parents. And now she needs to go find a job. And so a recruiter will find her and will say, hey, you can come to Bali where, you know, the economy is great. You can work in my hotel and it'll be great. And she says, okay, cool. I'll sign the contract. So he pays for her a ticket, which she now is in debt for the ticket, gives her a cell phone. So now she's in debt for the phone. And when she shows up in Bali, she shows up to a brothel and she says, I don't want to be here. I came here to work as a maid at a hotel. And he'll say, but you signed this contract to work for me and you have to work for me to pay off this debt for your phone and for your ticket before you can go home. And if she still says no, then he says, yeah, well, I know where your mom lives. I know where your kid lives. I'll hurt them if you don't stay. And so now she's like forced into the brothel. And I've heard that story, you know, 101 times from different girls. So, you know, in Indonesia, we really have to focus on issues like child marriage, issues like poverty alleviation, safe migration, job, like legitimate job creation. So, you know, I think each region kind of has its contributing factors or the risk factors. Mm-hmm. And I think those who want to get involved, it's like, figure it out. Like, what is it? You know, you're wanting to focus on the region you're from, or if there's a certain part of the world that you care about, like learn all you can about the contributing factors, learn what the real stories are and listen to survivors, because we can't fix what we don't know. And we're not going to know unless we've heard the people that have experienced it, right? Like they're the experts here. So yeah, I think that's what I would say, just in terms of all of the stories out there that are mostly garbage. Like they are.
That was very insightful. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you gave me the soapbox, so I had to stand on it. That one's, I'm very passionate about that one.
Yeah, I can see why. I can understand that. Thank you so much for your time. What's the best place to connect with you? And
our website's easy, darkbali.org. There's a lot of info up there. We try to do a blog just for people that are trying to get information about the topic, about Indonesia specifically. There's a resource page in English and in Indonesian if people are trying to educate themselves. And then there's a contact form too. So that goes straight to me. And English or Indonesian is fine. So yeah, if you want to contact me, ask questions or whatever, follow up, I'm always happy to have a conversation.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for taking some time to share it with all of us today. And
yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was super fun.